The gunshot that pierced the evening calm sent Kathleen Winters ducking behind the wooden water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. It wasn't the first time the townsfolk of Dry Creek, Arizona, had tried to frighten her away, but it was certainly the boldest attempt yet. The year was 1873, and the frontier town had little tolerance for women who didn't know their place, especially women like Kathleen, who insisted on wearing trousers, carrying a sidearm, and managing her late father's ranch without a husband. "You best pack up and leave, Winters." A voice shouted from the shadows. "Your kind ain't welcome here." Kathleen recognized the voice as belonging to Luther Morgan, the banker who'd been trying to claim her land since her father passed 6 months ago. At 23, she was considered a spinster by most, but that suited her fine. What didn't suit her was being run off the land that rightfully belonged to her. "I've got every right to be here, Morgan," she called back, keeping low as she inched toward her horse. "My father's deed is legal and proper." Another shot rang out, splintering the post beside her. Kathleen didn't wait for a third. She swung onto her mare and galloped out of town, her long copper braid whipping behind her like a flame in the twilight. The 10-mile ride back to her ranch seemed longer than usual as darkness fell across the rugged landscape. When she finally crested the last hill and saw the silhouette of her modest ranch house against the starlit sky, Kathleen allowed herself to breathe. The small cattle operation wasn't much by some standards, but it was everything to her. Her father had built it with his own 2 hands after her mother died, and he'd raised Kathleen to be as tough as any man. He taught her to ride, rope, shoot, and manage the book skills that made her an oddity in Dry Creek, but kept the ranch running after his heart gave out last winter. As she approached the house, Kathleen noticed something amiss. A light flickered in the window and the door stood slightly ajar. She drew her Colt revolver and dismounted quietly, tethering her horse to a nearby post. With silent steps, she crept toward the house, prepared to confront whatever intruder had violated her home. She pushed the door open with the barrel of her gun, only to find a man slumped in her father's old chair. Blood stained his shirt, and his hat lay on the floor beside him. Despite his condition, his hand moved swiftly to his holster when he heard her enter. "I wouldn't," Kathleen warned, her gun steadier than her voice. The stranger's eyes blew as the summer sky met hers, and he slowly raised his hands in surrender. "Madam, I apologize for the intrusion. I was being pursued, and your place was the only shelter for miles." "Who's pursuing you?" she demanded, not lowering her weapon. "Men who don't take kindly to someone interfering with their plans," he replied, wincing as he shifted in the chair. "They were robbing the eastbound stagecoach. I happened upon them and managed to send them running, but not before one of them got lucky with his aim." Kathleen studied him carefully. His clothes were dusty but of good quality. The gun at his hip was well maintained, and there was something in the way he carried himself, even injured, that spoke of competence and confidence rather than desperation. "You have a name, stranger?" "Benjamin Calloway," he answered with a slight nod. "Most folks call me Ben." "Well, Mr. Calloway, you're bleeding on my floor." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "My apologies, Miss Winters, Kathleen Winters." She finally lowered her gun and approached him cautiously. The wound in his side was still seeping, but it didn't appear fatal. "Let me see that," she said, setting her revolver on the table but keeping it within reach. Ben removed his hand from his side, revealing a bullet graze that had torn through his shirt and into his flesh. Kathleen fetched water, whiskey, and clean rags, then set about cleaning the wound with practiced movements. "You've done this before," Ben observed, watching her work. "When you run a ranch alone, you learn to tend all manner of injuries," she replied, not looking up from her task. "Hold still. This will sting." She poured whiskey over the wound, and to his credit, Ben barely flinched. As she bandaged him, Kathleen became increasingly aware of his gaze upon her. Unlike most men who looked at her with disdain or lust, his eyes held curiosity and something that resembled respect. "You don't see many women running ranches on their own," he said. "You don't see many at all out here," she countered. "And even fewer who are allowed to do what they're capable of." Ben nodded thoughtfully. "Your father taught you well." Kathleen's hands stilled. "How did you know it was my father?" He gestured toward a photograph on the mantel. "You have his eyes. And the way you handle that revolver suggests military training passed down. Confederate, Union," she corrected. "My father didn't believe in owning people any more than he believed in telling his daughter she couldn't own property. A progressive man. A practical one." Kathleen tied off the bandage and stepped back. "You can rest here tonight, Mr. Calloway, but come morning I expect you to be on your way. I have enough troubles without adding a wounded stranger to the mix." Ben studied her face, noting the fatigue in her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. Troubles with the townsfolk. Kathleen moved to stoke the fire, avoiding his gaze. They don't take kindly to women who step outside traditional boundaries, especially when they're sitting on land that others want. "Let me guess the bank is calling in loans that were never due, and the sheriff seems to look the other way when you report trouble?" She turned to him, suspicious. "How would you know that?" Ben leaned forward despite the pain in his side. "Because I've seen it before. I work for the U.S. Marshal's Service. Land fraud is common in these territories, especially when the landowner is deemed vulnerable." Kathleen bristled at the word. "I'm not vulnerable, no," he agreed with a slight smile. "You certainly aren't, but they think you are, and that makes you a target." She considered his words, wondering if she could trust this man who'd appeared out of nowhere with a convenient story and a badge she hadn't seen. But something in his straightforward manner and the genuine concern in his eyes made her want to believe him. "I can manage my own problems, Mr. Calloway." "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Winters, but sometimes even the most capable individuals can benefit from having the law on their side." He grimaced as he shifted in his chair. "Though at the moment, I'm afraid I'm not the most imposing representation of federal authority." Despite herself, Kathleen smiled. "Get some rest, Marshal. We can discuss my troubles in the morning." As Ben settled into the chair, Kathleen retreated to her bedroom, but sleep eluded her. The events of the day swirled in her mind: the shot fired in town, the threat to leave, and now this mysterious marshal with sky-blue eyes who seemed to understand her predicament without judgment. It was that last part that unsettled her the most. She had grown accustomed to scorn and suspicion, but not to understanding. When dawn broke, Kathleen found Ben already awake, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He moved stiffly but with purpose, and she noticed he'd taken care to clean up after himself. "You look better this morning," she observed, accepting the cup he offered. "Amazing what a good night's rest can do," he replied. "Even in a chair." Over a simple breakfast of biscuits and jerky, Ben explained more about his work. He had been tracking a gang that had been terrorizing stagecoaches along the Arizona-New Mexico border. The encounter that left him wounded was just the latest in a string of robberies attributed to the Fletcher gang. "And what brings you to Dry Creek specifically?" Kathleen asked, still not entirely convinced of his story. Reports of similar tactics being used to pressure small landowners into selling. "The gang works with corrupt local officials to force people off valuable properties, which are then purchased by Eastern investors at a fraction of their worth." Kathleen's eyes narrowed. "Like Luther Morgan at the bank," Ben nodded. "His name has come up in my investigation." She pushed her plate away, her appetite gone. "He's been after my land since my father died. Says a woman has no business running a ranch. Offered me a pittance to save me the trouble of failing on my own. And the trouble in town yesterday." Kathleen hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing her problems with anyone. But there was something about Ben's direct gaze that made her want to trust him. "Morgan's men, they've been trying to scare me off. Yesterday was just the most direct attempt." Ben's expression darkened. "That's not just harassment, it's attempted murder. Why haven't you gone to the sheriff, Sheriff Davis?" Kathleen laughed bitterly. "He and Morgan play poker every Tuesday night. They're thick as thieves, quite possibly literally." Then it's time for federal intervention, Ben said firmly. But first, I need to see what we're dealing with. Show me your ranch. Despite her misgivings, Kathleen agreed. She saddled her mare while Ben prepared his own horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that had weathered the night in her small stable. His movements were still careful, but she noted with grudging admiration that he didn't complain about his injury. They rode the perimeter of her property, Kathleen pointing out the boundaries and the areas where she'd found cut fences and scattered cattle. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a small herd of cattle, a few horses, and enough grazing land to sustain them comfortably. "My father built everything you see," she explained as they surveyed the land from a high ridge. "Started with nothing but determination and a belief that honest work would be rewarded. He must have been proud to leave it all to you," Ben remarked. Kathleen's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "He never intended to leave so soon. He was teaching me everything he knew, but we thought we had more time. From what I've seen, he taught you well." She looked at him then, searching for the condescension she'd come to expect from men, but found none. "Most people think a woman has no business doing this kind of work." "Most people are fools," Ben said simply. "Capability isn't determined by gender but by character and skill. You have both." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for a long time. Before she could respond, a distant movement caught her eye. Riders approaching from the direction of town, at least 5 of them. "We have company," she said, reaching for her rifle. Ben followed her gaze and frowned. "Morgan's men, most likely. They've grown bolder since my father died." They urged their horses down the ridge, racing toward the ranch house. As they approached, Ben pointed to a stand of trees near the barn. "We'll have better cover there." They dismounted and secured their horses, then positioned themselves among the trees with a clear view of the approaching riders. Kathleen's hands were steady as she readied her rifle, but her heart pounded in her chest. "You don't have to stay," she told Ben. "This isn't your fight." He checked his revolver with practiced efficiency. "I'm a federal marshal, Miss Winters. Protecting citizens is precisely my fight." The riders slowed as they neared the house, spreading out in a menacing formation. At their lead was Luther Morgan himself, his expensive suit out of place against the rugged landscape. "Winters," he called out. "I know you're here. Time to talk terms." Kathleen exchanged a glance with Ben, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped out from the trees, rifle raised but not aimed directly at the men. "There's nothing to discuss, Morgan. This land isn't for sale." Morgan's face darkened at the sight of her. "You've had your chance to be reasonable, girl. Your father would be ashamed to see his legacy wasted on a woman playing at being a rancher." "My father taught me everything I know," Kathleen replied, her voice carrying across the yard, "including how to recognize a snake in the grass." Morgan's men shifted restlessly on their horses, hands hovering near their weapons. "This is your last warning. Sell to me now at a fair price or face the consequences." "Is that what you told the Andersons before their place mysteriously burned down?" Ben asked, stepping out to stand beside Kathleen. "Or the Wilsons before their cattle ended up scattered across 3 counties?" Morgan's eyes narrowed as he took in Ben's appearance. "And who might you be, stranger?" Ben pulled back his coat to reveal the badge pinned to his vest. U.S. Marshal Benjamin Calloway. "I've been investigating a pattern of land fraud and intimidation across this territory. Your name keeps coming up, Mr. Morgan." A flash of uncertainty crossed Morgan's face before he regained his composure. "I'm a respected businessman in this community, Marshal. I suggest you check your facts before making accusations." "Oh, I have facts," Ben assured him, his voice dangerously calm, "including testimonies from 3 former associates who are eager to reduce their sentences by providing details of your operation. The Fletcher gang has been quite informative." This revelation clearly unsettled Morgan, whose confident demeanor began to crack. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ben took a step forward. "Federal agents are currently examining bank records in Phoenix." How long do you think it will take them to trace the money from those stagecoach robberies to your accounts? Morgan's men exchanged nervous glances, their loyalty clearly wavering in the face of potential federal charges. Kathleen watched in amazement as Ben systematically dismantled the banker's confidence with nothing but words and the authority of his badge. "This is absurd," Morgan sputtered. "I won't be intimidated by false accusations." "That's rich coming from a man who sends gunmen to threaten a woman living alone," Kathleen interjected, her rifle still steady in her hands. Morgan glared at her with undisguised hatred. "You've been nothing but trouble since your father died. A proper woman would have sold this place and found a husband by now. And a proper man would conduct his business honestly instead of through threats and intimidation," Ben countered. "Now, I suggest you and your men leave this property immediately. Federal charges are coming, Morgan. How much time you spend behind bars depends on how cooperative you choose to be." For a tense moment, it seemed Morgan might order his men to attack. But as he looked from Ben's unwavering gaze to Kathleen's determined stance, something in him deflated. With a curt nod to his men, he turned his horse around. "This isn't over," he warned before riding away, his men following closely behind. As the dust settled, Kathleen lowered her rifle, her hands suddenly trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. "Will they really be arrested?" Ben's expression was grim but satisfied. "Yes, I've been building this case for months. Morgan just didn't know he was part of it until today." Kathleen studied him with newfound appreciation. "You put yourself at risk revealing your identity," he shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "It was a calculated risk. Men like Morgan rely on intimidation because they're ultimately cowards. Once they know they're being watched by federal authorities, they usually back down." "Usually?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Usually," he confirmed with a slight smile. "But I don't think Morgan will be troubling you again. And if he does, he'll find himself facing more charges than he can count." They walked back to the house together, the tension of the confrontation gradually easing into a quiet companionship that felt surprisingly natural. As they reached the porch, Kathleen turned to Ben with a directness that was characteristic of her nature. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not many would have stood with me against Morgan and his men." "Not many have your courage, Miss Winters," he replied. "Standing alone against such odds takes remarkable strength." His words touched something deep within her, a yearning for recognition that she hadn't even acknowledged to herself. Not recognition as a woman trying to be something she wasn't, but as a person capable and deserving of respect. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked, surprising herself with the invitation. "It's the least I can offer for your help." Ben's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "I'd be honored." Over the next few days, Ben remained at the Winters ranch, his wound healing under Kathleen's capable care. He sent telegrams to his superiors, providing updates on Morgan's activities and requesting additional agents to assist with the investigation. In the meantime, he made himself useful around the ranch, helping with repairs and offering insights from his own experiences on his family's farm in Missouri. Kathleen found herself increasingly comfortable in his presence. Unlike other men she'd known, Ben didn't question her abilities or suggest she needed protection. Instead, he worked alongside her as an equal, offering assistance when needed but never assuming she couldn't manage on her own. "You're different from most men I've encountered," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. "How so?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "You don't seem bothered by a woman who wears trousers and carries a gun. Most find it unnatural." Ben considered her words for a moment. "My mother raised 4 boys after my father died in the war. She learned to plow fields, mend fences, and handle firearms because she had to. She taught me that strength comes in many forms, and judging someone based on expectations rather than actions is a fool's errand." "She sounds remarkable," Kathleen said softly. "She was," he agreed. She would have liked you, I think. You remind me of her in some ways, determined, capable, unwilling to be confined by others' expectations. Kathleen felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. Is that why you became a marshal? Because of her? Ben nodded. Partly. I saw how people tried to take advantage of her, a widow with land and children. The local sheriff stepped in more than once to prevent it. I wanted to do the same for others. As twilight deepened into night, their conversation flowed easily from past experiences to future hopes. Ben spoke of his desire to establish law and order in the territories, to create communities where people could live and work without fear of exploitation or violence. Kathleen shared her dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, improving the bloodlines of her horses, creating something that would last beyond her lifetime. Have you never thought of sharing that dream with someone? Ben asked cautiously. A partner. Kathleen stared out at the darkening landscape. The men in these parts aren't interested in a partner. They want a wife who knows her place, not a woman who can outshoot and outride them. Not all men feel that way, Ben said quietly. She turned to look at him, his features illuminated by the soft glow from the window behind them. No, I suppose not all do. The week that followed brought significant changes to Dry Creek. Additional marshals arrived from Tucson, and Luther Morgan was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted intimidation. Several of his associates, including Sheriff Davis, were also taken into custody. The town buzzed with gossip and speculation, but for the first time since her father's death, Kathleen was able to ride into Dry Creek without fearing for her safety. The territorial governor is appointing a temporary sheriff, Ben explained as they rode back from town one afternoon. Someone honest who can restore proper law enforcement until elections can be held. And what about you? Kathleen asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind for days finally finding voice. Will you be moving on to your next assignment? Ben slowed his horse, turning to face her directly. That depends. On what? On whether there's a reason for me to stay. Kathleen felt her heart quicken at the implication in his words. Is catching criminals not reason enough for a U.S. Marshal? There are criminals everywhere, he said with a small smile. But not everywhere has someone I've come to care for deeply. She reined her horse to a stop, suddenly unable to continue the pretense of casual conversation. Ben, I'm not like other women. I won't give up this ranch or how I choose to live my life, not even for I would never ask you to, he interrupted gently. What drew me to you, Kathleen, is precisely who you are: strong, independent, uncompromising in your beliefs. Your difference from what society expects isn't something to be changed or hidden. It's what makes you extraordinary. Tears pricked at Kathleen's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had built walls around her heart after years of rejection and ridicule, never allowing herself to hope for understanding, let alone admiration. People will talk, she warned, her voice unsteady. A federal marshal involved with a woman like me. Let them talk, Ben said, reaching across to take her hand. I've spent my life upholding justice, not conforming to narrow-minded expectations. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Kathleen looked down at their joined hands, his larger one encompassing hers with gentle strength. And what exactly are you proposing, Marshal Calloway? For now, the chance to court you properly, he replied with a smile. To see if what I feel for you might be returned, and if it is, to build something together that honors both our dreams rather than requiring either of us to abandon our own. The sincerity in his voice broke through the last of her defenses. I think I would like that very much. The months that followed transformed both their lives. Ben accepted a permanent assignment to the Arizona Territory, establishing an office in Tucson, but spending much of his time in and around Dry Creek. As he had promised, he courted Kathleen with respect for her independence, joining her in the work of the ranch when his duties allowed and supporting her decisions without trying to override them. For her part, Kathleen found herself opening up to possibilities she had long since dismissed. She discovered that partnership didn't have to mean submission, that loving someone didn't require diminishing herself. Ben's admiration for her strength and capabilities only deepened as they faced challenges together, from drought that threatened the cattle to remnants of Morgan's associates, who still harbored grudges. The townsfolk of Dry Creek gradually adjusted to seeing them together, the federal marshal and the unconventional rancher woman. Some still whispered behind their hands, but many came to respect the pair who had exposed corruption and brought a measure of justice to their community. On a crisp autumn evening exactly 1 year after Ben had stumbled wounded into Kathleen's home, he took her to the ridge overlooking the ranch. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, highlighting the improvements they had made together: new fencing, an expanded barn, a small orchard beginning to take root near the house. "I have something to ask you," Ben said, taking both her hands in his. Kathleen smiled, already guessing his question. "I believe tradition calls for you to kneel." "I thought you weren't much for tradition," he teased, but dropped to one knee nonetheless. "Kathleen Winters, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've shown me that true strength lies in being exactly who you are, regardless of what others expect or demand. I love you for your courage, your determination, and your unwavering spirit. Will you marry me?" Kathleen looked down at this man who had seen her not as an oddity to be corrected, but as a partner to be cherished. "On one condition," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Name it. That you never ask me to be anything other than who I am." Ben rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. "Your difference is what made you mine, Kathleen. I wouldn't change a single thing about you." Their wedding the following spring was unlike any Dry Creek had seen. Kathleen wore a dress for the ceremony, a concession to tradition that she made willingly, but changed into her familiar trousers for the celebration afterward. Ben, resplendent in his formal marshal's uniform, looked at her with such obvious adoration that even the most critical observers couldn't deny the rightness of their union. They built their life together on mutual respect and shared dreams, expanding the ranch while Ben continued his work bringing law to the frontier. When their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's copper hair and her father's sky-blue eyes, they named her Liberty, a testament to the freedom they had found in loving each other as they truly were. Years later, when Dry Creek had grown into a proper town with a railway station and a schoolhouse, people would still tell the story of Kathleen Winters Calloway, the woman who refused to be cast aside for being different, and Benjamin Calloway, the marshal who loved her not despite her differences, but because of them. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, their home a haven for those who didn't quite fit the mold society had created for them. And on quiet evenings, long after the work was done, Ben would still look at his wife with the same wonder he had felt that first night, when a fierce woman with a rifle and unwavering principles had tended his wounds and captured his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" Kathleen asked him once as they watched their 3 children playing in the yard, Liberty now teaching her younger brothers to ride. "Regret what?" Ben replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Tying yourself to a woman who causes talk wherever she goes." Ben laughed and pulled her closer. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't find you sooner." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides, they're not talking about you being different anymore. They're talking about how right we were for each other all along." Kathleen leaned into his embrace, content in the knowledge that she had found the rarest of gifts, a love that celebrated rather than constrained, that saw strength where others saw defiance, and that had turned her difference from a burden into a blessing. In a world that had tried to cast her aside, she had found the one man who recognized that her true value lay precisely in what set her apart.